Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator at the Financial Times in London. Mr. Wolf, thank you very much for taking out time to be with us on CNBC TV 18. Well, what happens next week, for instance? Is it going to be life as usual, or are we going to see the European political class huddle together and give us a reply?
Well, there will certainly be a response from Europe next week. There's going to be a summit early next week. They're going to have to say something about the implications, how they're going to handle it. It will presumably be fairly anodyne. It's very early days in terms of any negotiations. That's going to take a long time. Meanwhile, back here in London, the Prime Minister has resigned. He will be a caretaker but won't be able to decide anything. There'll be a new leader of the Conservative Party who will emerge probably in early October, so we've got a long interregnum of basically 3 months. The Scottish Premier has already announced the possibility, indeed I think the probability of another referendum on Scottish independence, since Scotland voted to stay in and the rest of the country, England mainly, has voted to leave. So there's an enormous amount of political uncertainty. This is going to last years. The markets, of course, have been shocked because it's changed their view of what is possible, not only in the UK, but of course more broadly. They think, well, what are they? Well, imitation effects possibly in other countries where there are strong populist movements, not only in Europe but also, of course, in North America. Look at Donald Trump. This is a rejection of the establishment by the mass of the people, or a large swathe of the people. The result is not a surprise. It's within the poll era, but it's nonetheless a shock. And so that's where we are.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wolf, and thanks so much for joining in. You've touted this event as the most significant one since World War II. Britain may be the first to leave the EU, but it perhaps may not be the last, as you pointed out. Do you think this is slowly the start of an EU disintegration?
Well, I hope not, because I believe that despite mistakes, the EU has been an enormous success in knitting together the continent and underpinning its security and above all its prosperity. The Eurozone was a big error, but I think they're beginning to manage it better. So the disintegration of Europe, in my view, would benefit nobody but populists and xenophobes. The dangerous consequences are enormous. I think the only person who are really delighted by this is Vladimir Putin. But of course it is obvious that there are populist movements not so different to this in France, where Marine Le Pen, the Front National leader, is likely to be the winner in the first round of the presidential elections. In the Netherlands, in Germany even, there's a populist party. In Scandinavia there are populist parties, and they're all going to be encouraged by this, and they're going to say we should have referenda too. I hope they won't be given them, but maybe they will, and therefore there might be more disintegration, and that's what the European leaders now have to fight against.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, let me try and separate fact from hope. First, what happens next? What will be the sequence of events? Is that at some point in time you will start seeing Britain being separated in trade agreements and as to its relation with the European Common Market? So tell us the series of events that we have to look forward to.
Well, first of all, we know roughly what's going to happen, but we cannot know in detail because there are decisions that have to be taken. The first event is for Britain to have a new government with a new programme which sets out what it wants to achieve. It then has to decide when to trigger the exit procedure, so-called Article 50 procedure with the European Union. That procedure, once it triggers it, is supposed to take 2 years. And that will be a procedure for exiting the European Union and working out precisely how to make that possible. That could probably be done within 2 years, but it won't be 2 years from now. It will be 2 years from when they trigger it, which will probably be later this year, but we can't be sure. At the same time, but probably taking much longer, not certainly much longer, but probably will be a discussion of a new trade relationship with the European Union. That's going to be complicated because there are many possible options and we don't know what the remaining members will want to offer us. That could take a long time. Meanwhile, of course, once Britain leaves the EU, it will no longer be part of the EU's trading agreement, so it's then going to have to sign trade agreements with the rest of the world, including particularly all the partners that the EU has a special trade agreement with. And finally, it's going to have to put forward a new schedule of trade policies for the World Trade Organization, which are then going to be negotiated with all the other members. In total, this more complex business of arranging Britain's trade relationships after we've left the EU with the EU, with the trading partners of the EU and with the rest of the world in the WTO could take many, many years.
Mr. Wolff, coming to the economic aspect of it, the pound is also making history along with the plunging UK stocks. It's slid the most on record. It's at a, 30-year low right now. It's quite possible that the UK is likely to see a recession in the back of this development. That's what a few of the economists have said. But will that spill over to result in a recession across the EU as well? Or do you think the effect will be a little more localized?
A recession in the UK is very likely. It won't be really triggered by the fall in sterling. To some degree, that might even cushion it because it will improve our competitiveness. But I expect investment to be very, very badly affected by the uncertainty. Many companies will say, until we know what's going to happen, we can't really make our investment plans. And that will be the driver of any significant recession. There could be follow-on effects on public finances, but I think the government can avoid dealing with them at once. Now, as far as Europe is concerned, a recession in the UK would certainly slow the Eurozone. The UK is its most important trading partner, but I'm assuming that there will be offsets. Monetary policy could possibly become even more expansionary in the Eurozone. The ECB has firepower. They can be more relaxed about the fiscal positions. They can let them deteriorate. And I would expect this to lead to a slowdown in the Eurozone, but probably not an overall recession, though it might be quite bad for specific economies. Ireland is an obvious example because it's so closely linked with Britain. But for the rest of Europe, I think a slowdown, but given that it's recovering from the crisis, probably not a recession.
Mr. Wolff, we've long heard from European leaders that they don't want to repeat the mistake of the Second World War to avoid the balkanization of Europe, and repeatedly that sentiment has won. Do you think the European political class can huddle together and come back with a more pro-union reply?
Well, that I think is what they will probably try to do, and they might well start in the summit meeting next week. They will indicate that their first priority is to keep the EU together, to manage the exit of Britain while minimizing the damage to the EU, the rest of the EU. They might well put forward some proposals for strengthening the Eurozone that have been on the table now for a long time. I don't know how much further they will go because these are all politically very difficult and divisive within the Eurozone. A lot will depend on the German response, and it's not clear what it will be. But I think the basic sentiment they will put forward, particularly from the big states of the European Union, that the survival of the European Union is essential to the security and prosperity of the European continent, that they're very sorry Britain has left, but it remains essential, and they will do everything they possibly can to reinforce it. And in the short term, that I think will be a reasonably convincing response to the shock that they are now experiencing. In the longer run, nobody fully knows the consequences of such a decision.
Mr. Wolf, in your earlier answer, you indicated that we are seeing similar movements across other countries, and in that, you also named the rise of, Donald Trump in the U.S. Is it very naive to say that the odds of he being elected as the U.S. president have just gone up, given the way popular sentiment is, if you read that in the U.K.?
Well, it's difficult to assess, and I've tended to assume that Hillary Clinton was more likely to win the presidency than the Remain side was likely to win the referendum. But what it reveals very clearly there's no knock-on effect, it seems to me, but what it reveals very clearly is a very substantial part of our population, basically the old, the provincial, if you like, the people who are not living in great cosmopolitan cities. London voted in favor of staying in, for example, just as New York will not vote for Trump, so New York City will not vote for Trump. So the old, the provincial areas, the non-metropolitan areas, the relatively less successful economically, the old working class, as we would call it, these people across many countries are deeply unhappy with the emergence of our globalized economies, with the free movement of peoples, with the move to highly internationally integrated and cosmopolitan ways of life. And this is the backlash we're seeing, and that's been made much worse, of course, by the aftermath of the financial crisis, which destroyed the authority, the credibility of the establishment, and particularly of establishment economists and financiers.
Mr. Wolf, today after plunging to 1.3, the pound recovered to closer to 1.3839. Do you think that the pound has seen its worst, or do you think it's just a knee-jerk short covering, and in the days to come, as probably recession becomes a reality, we are going to see the pound touch fresh lows?
Well, one of my great rules in life is never to forecast currencies, and I'm deeply suspicious of anyone who tries to do so. It was obvious that, pretty obvious, that once we voted to leave, that the pound will be marked down. That the country has a huge current account deficit, it's dependent on capital inflows, it's pretty clear that capital inflows will be affected, so the marking down of the pound was inevitable. I think whether it will stabilize now, my short answer is I don't know, and the longer answer is it will depend on events whose outcome we also don't know. It will depend on how stable the political situation in Britain seems to be, whether a credible new government looks like emerging with seriously well worked out policies. None of that looks very likely to me at the moment, but I have to hope. And it depends, of course, on how the markets respond in terms of capital flows, not just the currency markets, and it depends on how the Europeans and the rest of the world respond. So it could be that we've now touched the low, but it could also quite plausibly be that we haven't. It's obvious that Britain as an economy is in the process of being re-rated. That re-rating could take quite a while.
I'm not planning to hold your words back to you or quote your words back to you at all, but just tell us your gut, since you're one of the most intelligent observers of the European scene. Do you think in this decade the EU will survive with 27 countries? Do you think the euro will survive? Just your gut.
My gut is that the EU will survive and the euro will survive, but it is possible, I wouldn't say probable, but it is possible, and when I say possible, I mean quite a significant chance that the number of members of the EU and the number of members of the euro will diminish. That is to say, there will be a shakeout. If we're thinking of the next decade or so, that seems to me perfectly possible. I think it is more likely than that people will leave the EU than that they will leave the euro, because it's so costly. But I think it is easy to imagine that people will leave. At the same time, there are people trying to get in. New members are likely. So the net effect on the total numbers is actually unclear. But this has shaken the EU, and there might well be some countries that end up leaving.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, we appreciate you taking time out for us. Thank you very much for joining in and educating us, the best educated guest that we can get about how things might pan out from here on.